Hey friends, Kevin, your budget travel guy here. And one of the questions that comes up all the times in groups and forums is, what book do I need in order to do Route 66? Well, the simple answer is you need more than one to really do this right. So I'm going to show you what books you need, where to get them, and how to use them to make the most of your Route 66 experience. Okay, now I have only done about half of Route 66 so far. And the reason for that is I have no interest in being one of those people that drives 2,448 miles in 6 days. That's just not the way I do things. I want to take my time and explore and find the old sections of road and find what used to be there on real 66, not historic tourist trap 66. So with that said, I wasted a lot of time and a lot of money on web applications and print books that just weren't very helpful at all in what I was trying to do. Now, as far as why I like printed guides, one, it's just more of a feel for the way things used to be. Technology is great. GPS is going to be very helpful. But the fact is, you're going to hit into a lot of areas, especially in the West, that you're going to go stretches that you just don't have internet access. And trying to rely on websites and trying to rely on these downloadable applications, which often are just regurgitated information, it's not going to help you. This is why you need real books to get the most out of your trip. Along the way, though, I hit on this combination of 3 books that will do everything that I wanted to do, and I think everything that you want to do. Now I'm going to show you these 3 books. I'm going to show you what's inside of each one and what makes them different and why you need each one. The first one is the Easy 66 Guide by Jerry McClanahan. If you look at any other groups or forums, they'll pretty much tell you this is the Bible for Route 66. I'd agree with that. It is very, very valuable. It is definitely one you want to have, and if you could only have one, this would be it. But nothing is going to be absolutely complete, depending on your style of adventuring, including this one. The second one is going to be this Route 66 Adventure Handbook. Now, this is available either as a paperback or this Kindle edition. The third one is going to be finding either the original or a reprint of this guidebook that was done just after World War II. Now, what you have to understand is in the beginning, Route 66 was basically a bunch of cobbled together roads just to get from point A to point B. Sometimes they run on the outskirts of town, sometimes they run right through the center of town, and a lot of times they changed these over the years. And it's what they refer to as alignments. So for 2 decades, the road 66 may have gone down Main Street, and then for the next couple of decades, it may have ventured over 3 or 4 blocks to the right. And in some places, it may have ventured over 3, 4, 5 miles out of the way. In addition to that, once 66 basically ceased to exist around 1980, and now that it's been brought back, again, especially in this western part, Interstate 40 ran over top of and took a lot of 66. So you have places where the interstate runs and 66 parallels or 66 crossed over until it was destroyed. And then you have some places that are pretty far out from Interstate 40. So you need to know what all these areas are, because a lot of these signs you see now that say, you know, historic 66, they're just taking you off an exit into town. You may get a little bit of what used to be 66, and you may not. It's just what they call 66 now. And if that's what you're doing to get down to a couple of shops to sell you some Indian merchandise, you're going to miss the real what 66 was in that area, which is why you need these different books. So let's get into what each one has to offer you. Now, the great thing about this Easy 66 guide is it gives you a little history and it gives you a pretty good description of things. Unfortunately, except for a few oddball drawings, it doesn't really show you pictures of anything. So you may go a really long way to run into something that you really didn't care about, or there's not much left of whatever it was. But just to give you an example, let's get into this area around Groom, Texas. And it'll tell you whether you're going westbound or eastbound, how to go and take I-40 and exit blah blah. And Groom will tell you about several different side trips, different things. When you get off the exit off I-40 and jump onto this part of 66, you're going to run into this Leaning Tower of Groom. Well, that's nice, and you can actually see it from the interstate, and you'll figure out what it is. But if all you have is this book, you have no idea of what this is. Then it's going to tell you about this giant cross. Well, the giant cross is great, and you can miss it if you're not paying attention. It's 190 feet tall, but this drawing just really doesn't do much to excite you about it. But it tries to give you a little bit of history about the towns and what have you, so it does a good job overall, and you can go place to place to place to place down through here. It will also do a good job of telling you about different alignments that have been done over the years. It does miss one or two, which we'll get to why you need these other books in a moment. But again, you get into Amarillo, and there's a couple of things that most people will want to do going through Amarillo. One is this big Texan steakhouse, but you know, it really doesn't tell you that much about it, enough to make you want to bounce over there unless you're looking for a giant steak. But it's one of those places you should stop, because even though it's a tourist trap, and I have a video to it that I'll link in the description, they just do the tourist trap thing better than anybody else for several states. So it's definitely worth a stop. And then not too far from there, you're going to get into Cadillac Ranch and all of that. Where Cadillac Ranch is now is next to Interstate 40. It was moved there a few years ago. That wasn't the original location. As a matter of fact, the original location wasn't even on Route 66, but it was near Route 66. And there's a lot of things that it will tell you about side trips, and that's what you want these books for when you're in an area, because sometimes the better things are actually several miles off of Route 66. So Route 66 is good if you can follow their directions and their little maps, but sometimes you want to be a little more specific, and you want to know kind of what you're going to go see, and that's why this book, to me, is a good addition to the other one. Now, in the same area in this book, it is going to tell you, again, a little bit about the town. It's going to tell you about a little bit about this Leaning Water Tower in the same location I showed you in the other book. But it's actually going to show you a picture of it. And while this is easy to find because it is right off the interstate ramp you're going to take to get back on 66, it does have GPS locations for most of the things in here. And that makes this pretty invaluable to me, because on the out-of-the-way stuff, sometimes it's hard to find, sometimes it's easy to miss, and you're going to need these GPS coordinates to find a lot of these things. Now, this is one of my favorites, and this is what makes the trip really work if you are trying to find these old sections of road, because I like driving on these old sections of road and finding the abandoned houses and the abandoned buildings, and where you're going to find most of those now aren't in Tourist Trap 66. It's going to be the original alignments. Now, this book was done in 1946. I believe this gentleman reprinted this again in the 80s. It is long out of print. You will just about have to find this either in a used bookstore, possibly a used copy on Amazon or on eBay, and it's hit and miss. Sometimes I'll look on eBay, there'll be 3 of these on there, and then you may go 3 months that there are just none of these that are put on there. So my advice, and I'll link over so you can do a quick search and see if they're there, but my advice is if you see it, grab it. Anytime you see one of these, grab it. Now, this book is going to be mostly text, a few maps, and a few drawings. But for the time, it is very, very well laid out. It's going to give you all the distances between major cities going in each direction. and you're going to be able to follow it east to west, or if you're going west to east, you're going to be going back to front in the opposite direction. And I love these little things in the back, how they were done originally, all the things about the trip. So the person that bought this book, where we had good food, where we had good lodgings, could take their own notes. Record of oil and gas expenses. Let's get into that same area in Texas that we looked at in the other two books. Because in the day, and you can see on this little section of the map where it's showing you the towns, you will see Groom listed. But you didn't have the Leaning Tower in Groom, and you didn't have that giant cross outside of Groom. Those are things that were put in there probably in the last 30 to 40 years. So in the old days, the people that ran this route originally, that stuff wasn't there. So let's see what it does say about Groom. Now remember, these weren't interstate mile markers then, so it's giving you mileage from one point to another, but it's going to talk about Groom, a population of 475, has a small hotel, wall cafe, several others, gas garages, stores, a little farming community, and that's all it's basically going to tell you, because that was all that existed then. But what you want to do in these places, as you're going through things like Sayre, is you want to compare what it's explaining to you in here against what is in these other books now. Because this is where you can go find the abandoned stuff and figure out what it used to be. Or you can stop and talk to locals who are completely invaluable at pointing you to where this stuff used to be. Because where books and signage is going to take you down 66 now is not what was in here in 1946 and earlier, many, many, many times. So as it drags you down Main Street today, all of this great abandoned stuff may be 3 or 4 blocks over one way or another, and if you're following the signs of what people tell you to do today, you are going to miss all of this great stuff that's described in here. Now this is where this is going to get interesting to you on 66, and when you get into Arizona, it's going to talk about the Painted Desert, and it's going to talk about the Petrified Forest and all of these Indian areas. Petrified Forest is now a national park. There is a little bit of what used to be 66 inside the park, but for the most part, 66 got wiped out. But this is going to be interesting for all the things that were around it at the time, in addition to going into the national park now and finding the things that are talked about in here that still exist. Because there are some rocks and things, unfortunately, that have fallen since then. And I just don't think anything else is going to give you the variety that this set is going to give you if you really want to research and study and pick a location where you are and find out what's there now and how to get to it and what used to be there back in the day. So you have this for your modern description, this to make it a little easier to find modern things. And by modern, I mean things that still exist, may or may not be open, but still pretty much exist. Then you're going to have this for the way things used to be. So what I generally do is I start with this as an overview, then I go to this to get a little more detail, and between the two I can figure out pretty much where they are, because sometimes a description doesn't cut it, you need the GPS. Sometimes the GPS has trouble getting you there and you need a description on how to get there. So that's why you really need to have both of these. And for stuff that's been there forever or stuff that's abandoned, you can see the way it used to be. But even more valuable is there's going to be stuff in here that isn't in here anymore. Because while the original complete buildings may not exist, you can figure out where, and especially again with talking to locals, you can figure out where hotels and landmarks and lodges and stores and tourist trap areas that had animals and all of these things, there may be foundations left. There may be partial buildings left. They may be a mile or two off of what Route 66 is now, because Route 66 was in a different area then. And those things aren't a lot of times even mentioned in these books. And as great as this book is, I can tell you that I ran into an older gentleman in a little town in Texas, and I stopped and we had a long conversation, and he had some relatives in Virginia, and we just hit it off. And he had been a little boy there. This man was about 80 years old now. And we're talking about me doing 66 and taking some pictures and what have you. And he says, you know, there's another part of 66 up there that changed even before I was born. I'm like, really? And he describes it, and he takes me around and shows me, and I start on this trek, and sure enough, it is the original road. But that original road isn't mentioned in these books. As a matter of fact, it is not even in the 1946 guidebook, which was pretty much the first real book, coast to coast, I believe, ever done about Route 66 at the time, because that alignment had already again changed. And there's about a 7 or 8 mile stretch that's just absolutely gorgeous and virtually unused today, that people using either of these are going to miss. And there's little sections like that all over the place when you get out there. When you're running these old sections, it's not uncommon to be on an old section of Route 66 and all of a sudden you drive up to a gate or a fence. And that's now private property and you can't go any further, and you have to backtrack and maybe get back on the interstate, drive around and get off the next exit and find your way in order to continue on in 66. That's all part of the adventure. But when you hit those really out of the way areas, that to me is the most interesting part, because that's where you're going to find the original bridges and original road surfaces even, that you're not going to find running down Tourist Trap 66. So I hope this helps you out. Pick up these 3 books or some combination of these 3 books. Like I said, if you can only have one, definitely go with his. If you can have 2, go with it and the book I had on the Kindle. Take the time to search out one of these. And like I said, if you ever run across one pops up on eBay, now that you know what you're looking for, go ahead and grab it. I promise you, you won't be sorry because of the stuff you'll be able to find with this. All right, what to watch next to help you out, in the description of this video and pinned down in the comments, you will find links to other videos that will help you out with different things on Route 66. You will also find some links if you're into van life or RV life. I travel in 2 vans. If you haven't watched this channel before, sometimes I'm in a converted minivan. That may interest a lot of people, how to convert a minivan or an SUV. And then I have a Class B, which is a large van that came from the factory converted. It's an older van. We've done a lot to bring it up to date, and you may be interested in those videos too. So there's a little something for everyone. We travel to different places. We talk about how to save money in different places in a lot of videos in order to fund your adventures. So stick around. I'm sure we'll have something good for you, and we'll see you next time.